Hey, let's work on enabling transaction mining in the cryptocurrency application. To facilitate this, we'll make a new transaction miner class in the app directory. So let's start with a transaction-miner.js file within app. This transaction miner class is going to hold a mine transaction function, which calls all the necessary functionality to properly add a block of the transaction pool's data to the blockchain. So let's create the class called transaction miner, and then let's add the mine transactions method. And the end result is that we're going to export this transaction miner class. So we'll set it equal to transaction miner. All right, nice. This mine transaction function is going to coordinate quite a few behaviors. First, we want to get the transaction data that is going to make up the new block. And we're going to get that from the transaction pool. But we don't want to blindly grab all the data in the transaction pool. After all, this is a freely network contributed pool. So we want to make sure that we only get valid transactions from this pool. We don't have the functionality for this just yet. So for the time being, let's add a comment that says get the transaction pool's valid transactions. All right. Now, the next step is to generate a reward transaction for doing this mining work. This is the incentive for mining at all, and spending your computational power to generate a valid hash for a new block. We don't have that functionality yet either, so let's also add a comment to generate the miner's reward. All right, let's continue this format and continue making comments in place of the actual methods before we can actually create them, since we're not going to write anything until we actually have the transaction pool valid transactions method, as well as a way to generate the mining reward. But the next step to this is that now that we have the valid transactions and the miner's reward, is to add a block consisting of these transactions to the blockchain. All right, cool. And with this block added, we need to make sure the entire network is in the know. So let's broadcast the updated blockchain, so that way all the interested parties are aware of the new block. Finally, the last step is to clear the transaction pool, since we've already included its data in the blockchain. So we're going to say clear the pool. Great. Now, in order to accomplish all of this behavior, we're going to need to make sure that the transaction miner has access to all the relevant objects. So let's pass those in the constructor within an overall object. So the transaction miner is going to have a constructor. It's going to be an overall object that has the blockchain, a transaction pool, so that way it can get the valid transactions. It's going to need a wallet as well as the pub/sub implementation, so that way it can do a broadcast. And finally, let's set local properties for this transaction miner instance according to everything that is being passed in. So this.blockchain for the blockchain, this.transaction pool for the transaction pool, this.wallet for the wallet, and finally this.pub/sub for the wallet. So that way these can be accessed within the mine transactions method. Great. Now we can't successfully use this mine transaction method until we've implemented all of these functions. So we have about half of the necessary methods in place. So overall, we're going to use this as a guidepost for what we need to develop next. And one by one, we're going to place these comments with valid code. And by the end, we're going to have a way to successfully mine transactions into the blockchain. So the first one of these is to grab valid transactions, and let's do that next.